And welcome to Data Talks Live. I'm Dr. Tom, and as usual, we're going to talk about data, how it impacts society, how it's changing the world. My goal is simple: cut through the noise, drop the spin, and get to the data-driven truth of the issues that matter. Whether it's national policy, local transportation, or sports, or anything else. We're going to look at three cases today. The U.S. government is currently shut down, and we're going to look at how it actually impacts the economy, military readiness, and intelligence operations. There's been a change where I live related to our HOV lane on the expressway in how getting rid of what we call the Clean Pass program in New York is going to impact fuel use and emissions. We're going to talk a little bit about sports analytics, the rise of analytics in golf. I went to the Ryder Cup over the weekend, so what the numbers tell us and how it's changed the sport itself. So the first segment is around the government shutdown. So shutdowns reduce gross domestic product. And for those that don't know, gross domestic product is a measure of economic output of a nation. But why? So you can take the 2019 shutdown as an example. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that it was about an $11 billion hit, with $3 billion permanently lost, which didn't just appear from nowhere. It kind of came from three main mechanisms. So the first was frozen payrolls. Military families and federal employees missed getting their paychecks. So what happens is that immediately reduces consumer spending, which makes up about 70% of U.S. gross domestic product in total. So a soldier, sailor, Marine, airman who doesn't get paid, doesn't go out to eat, doesn't buy a new car, doesn't pay off debt. So when spending contracts, businesses see less revenue and growth slows. Another impact is contract delays. So federal agencies in 2019 couldn't sign or pay contracts for infrastructure, research, and services. So some contracts restart after the shutdown, but others just get canceled. So that's a source of permanently lost GDP for projects that never come back. And then there's an uncertainty premium. So investors and businesses rely on government data to plan in some cases. This is without jobs reports, consumer price index, markets swing on speculation. So if you were to look at the markets today, you would see that they're taking a downturn. So that volatility raises borrowing costs and reduces investment, with less capital flowing into growth, which creates a downstream economic drag. It's economic growth slows in the short term because of spending and investment drop. But over multiple shutdowns, long-term growth suffers because agencies lose talent, projects get canceled, and businesses start pricing instability into contracts. And I've actually seen that, where if an environment is unstable, you have to increase the price of a contract to account for some uncertainty, which makes sense because you're hedging against taking a hit. The other thing is inflation. Data blackouts make Fed policy less precise. If the Fed guesses wrong, tightening too much or too little, inflation volatility increases. Military readiness. Missed paychecks, lower morale. I can tell you that government shutdowns happened when I was in the military, and there was a lot of complaining about that. A lot of folks in the military live paycheck to paycheck, so a missed check could mean missed rent payment for military families unable to put food on the table that week. So that's a big concern, especially if you're deployed and your family is back at home and it's your responsibility to feed them and you can't. So furloughs, reduced training cycles, and civilian contractors in logistics or cyber defense stop working. That has a cumulative effect on preparedness. The other thing is in intelligence. In 2013, 70% of civilian intelligence staff were furloughed. Fewer analysts means fewer signals monitored, fewer translations, and slower cyber threat response. Security risks rise because blind spots grow. So it's not just GDP down 11 billion. It's stalled spending, delayed contracts, and a broken information pipeline. And that ripples into slower growth, riskier inflation control, weaker military readiness, and impaired national security. So just generally not good, especially considering that it seems like a political stunt. They always seem to find a way to continue to fund the government. So why not just skip this part? So next I want to talk a little bit about HOV lanes. So HOV lanes in the US date back to the 1970s energy crisis. I often hear my parents talk about waiting in line for getting gas. So the idea was simple: encourage carpooling to cut congestion and fuel use. Where I live, the HOV lanes were built in the mid-1990s with that goal. And in the early 2000s, New York introduced the Clean Pass program, which let hybrids and EVs use the HOV lanes even with a single driver. At that time, hybrids were rare and policymakers wanted to incentivize adoption. Today, Clean Pass vehicles are pretty common, and some argue that they clog the HOV lanes without reducing traffic. Now that Clean Pass program seems to be expiring and going back to carpools only. So I modeled 3 scenarios: carpools with Clean Pass, carpools only, and just no HOV lane. And what I got in my calcs, I'm going to describe them for you. So sort of the first scenario, HOV allows carpools and Clean Pass, and I made some assumptions there about how many vehicles per hour, kept those vehicles per hour steady across all 3 scenarios. So I said 2,000 vehicles per hour, about a 20-mile commute. Solo drivers got 25 miles per gallon. Carpools are more efficient because there are fewer vehicles, so I did about 28 miles per gallon. And Clean Pass vehicles around 50 miles per gallon equivalent, and that accounts for electric vehicles as well. So that's the baseline. So what I came up with is in scenario 1, HOV allows carpools and Clean Pass. It's about 6,205 gallons of fuel per hour, 12,411 gallons per day, or 3.1 million gallons per year. I also modeled emissions, which came out to about 55,000 kilograms per hour, or around 27 million kilograms per year. So that's scenario 1. Scenario 2, HOV allows carpools only, so the Clean Pass is gone, and they rejoin the general lanes. And this is what is looking like is going to occur. Same assumptions. So for that, we got about 6.18 million gallons per year of fuel and 28.29 million kilograms per year of CO2 emissions. So slightly less fuel usage with the HOV allowing carpools plus Clean Pass. And then scenario 3, no HOV, just open up all the lanes for general purpose. So for that, we got 3.2 million gallons per year, and emissions is about 28.44 million kilograms per year. So only a slight increase in emissions, and a slight increase in fuel consumption. So the lowest is HOV allows carpool and Clean Pass. That's the lowest total fuel consumption. Second lowest, HOV is for carpools only and opening up all 4 lanes for general purpose, well as the highest fuel consumption and also emissions across the board. So from my point of view, the best scenario to lower fuel consumption is that we maintain the current program, which is that the HOV allows carpools plus Clean Pass, which is not the current plan. So what I predict is that fuel consumption and emissions will go up slightly as a result of this change. Historically, carpool only was efficient, but now by banning Clean Pass, you're going to raise emissions because hybrids and EVs use less fuel. So when they're excluded, they end up in general traffic, pushing up the total gallons burned. Downstream impact, fuel economy, you're saving about 3,800 gallons a day, 1.4 million gallons per year. Carpools reduce vehicles, Clean Pass doesn't, but efficiencies shift. So the math shows including hybrids and EVs is better for net consumption. So I don't agree with the current choice to revert back to carpools only. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is analytics in sports and specifically golf. I was at the Ryder Cup over the weekend and I was noticing a lot of analytics kind of being pointed out throughout the game. So I think before analytics, golf strategy was anecdotal. Coaches relied on feel, intuition, and experience, driving accuracy and putting the thought to win tournaments. But that changed in the 2000s with Mark Brody's strokes gained analysis. And suddenly we had a data driven way to measure where players actually gained and lost strokes. So the data shows that driving distance mattered more than we thought. Long hitters gained 0.3 strokes per round more. And approach shots explain 40% of scoring variance, and putting explains only 15%. So this has changed the game. Driving distance rose 268 yards in 1995 to 299 yards today. That's a 31-yard gain. And so I think the downstream impact is that courses throughout that time have lengthened by 500 to 700 yards to keep up, which has raised maintenance costs and water use. And there's more focus on power and less on creativity. So data-rich pros are separated further from amateurs. So historically, golf was a game of tradition, but now it's a game of optimization and data, which I think is true generally in sports. So I think overall across shutdowns, HOV lanes, and golf analytics, the pattern is clear. One is historically, shutdowns were costly. Today, they are destabilizing. Historically, HOV lanes worked with carpools. Today, clean pass inclusion makes them more efficient, which is going away in New York. So they're going to be less efficient. And historically, golf was art and intuition. Today, data reshaped it into science and power. So that's why I have started this podcast, not just to show numbers, but to show how the historical baseline has shifted and why it matters now and what the downstream impacts are. So thanks for listening. Until next time, remember, data doesn't just describe the world, it drives it. And talk soon. Have a great day.